Everyone. Welcome to Tech Tuesday. My name is Tom Levine, Cornerstone's tech guru, and today we're going to be going through some video conferences and online meetings, tips, tricks, and walking you through a few of the more common programs used. Online meetings are something that we've all probably had to do since COVID began, almost a year ago now. While they're convenient and you can meet without being in the same location, they sometimes aren't very friendly to people who aren't tech savvy, or maybe it is. My goal here is to kind of demystify how some of these work and discuss some of the etiquette of online meetings too. But first, just a little bit of housekeeping. First, if you have a question, please feel free to type it in the question box. I'm going to answer all questions at the end of the presentation, but if I see something pop up that pertains to what we're covering, I'm going to mention it as well. So feel free to type your questions in there as they come up. Also, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly as well. If you feel like you have a question but don't want to put it out there for everyone to hear, you can email me directly at tlevine@crnstone.com. Just be sure to include Tech Tuesday in your subject line as well. I do filter by subject line, so it helps me out a great deal. Also, you can reach out to me at my number below or follow us on social media to get updates like our Monday Minute, or follow us for the latest Cornerstone and carrier and industry updates. Also, Autopilot, don't forget about it. It's our compensation-based client referral program, and it offers our services of licensed representatives to quote, enroll, support, and provide year-round service to clients that may be outside of your business scope. But we'll keep them on your radar. Go ahead and activate our autopilot at the link below. And finally, don't forget about our Refer an Agent program. If you recruit someone to us, we'll pay you. It's a $250 bonus as well. Some terms and conditions do apply. So with all that out of the way, let's get to the benefits of online meetings. We can't always meet face-to-face, especially now. A video call is a little bit more personal than talking on your phone, and it gives you access to more information about what your client's doing. It's always very important to see someone's, facial expression if you're talking to them and trying to really pick up on what they're taking away from your conversation. With a video call, that's something you get back that a phone call doesn't give you. It also gives your prospective client the same advantage. So if you're explaining something with a smile, people tend to be a little bit more receptive to it. And just being able to see a face to the information that, they're getting is always very helpful. It also not only helps with understanding, but it also speeds up conversation as well. If you're on the phone, you have to explain what page of what document you're looking at. You have to have shared the information beforehand. With a webinar or a online meeting, that's not something you actually need to do. It gives you the ability to do something called a screen share, which I'm going to show you how to do in all three of these systems in a moment. But it's basically what we're doing now. It gives your client access to view what you're walking them through. So you can physically walk them through a document even though you're not there with them. Also, it can save time because instead of pointing out where you have to go to, what you're looking at, you can literally draw on the screen and highlight it for them. I'm using the pen now to underline each of these bullet points. And you can do the same sort of thing through most software that is available for online meetings, at least on the desktop. Mobile versions might be a little less powerful, but you have that ability either way. There are, however, just a few things to consider before you start an online meeting, and this is across the board on any sort of platform. The first being your internet connection. Well, we covered this a little bit last year. You're going to probably want high-speed internet connections if you're doing video calls. One-on-one meetings are not very bandwidth intensive, but you also want to think about the environment that you're presenting in. By that, I mean your internet environment. You might have fast internet, but if you're not the only one using the internet at that time, you might run into issues. That's why I recommend always having a higher speed, higher bandwidth connection. You want to make sure you have at least 600 kilobytes per second, which I know is a computer term and probably doesn't mean much, but most speed connections offer this. When you're shopping for internet service, you're going to be buying in the the terms of megabits per second, and I recommend at least 200 if you're going to be using a video service. It's pretty much the lower tier broadband wired connection that Spectrum offers, so chances are you probably have at least that at home. But if you're using something like dial-up, you probably don't have a fast enough connection, and you're going to want to more than likely use some sort of hotspot to get your video call going. I also recommend not using pay-as-you-go data plans if you're going to use a connection like this. Typically, they tend to be a bit lower quality, and that also affects the quality of the service that you're giving. Today, we're also going to be going through a few different services, which brings us to question 2. What service are you going to use to share your video? There's GoToMeeting and Webex, but also Zoom that we're going to be covering today. Not in that order, but they aren't the only services that are available, and the competition in this market is fierce. I really recommend checking out a few other ones as well if you're trying to choose, but Zoom, GoToMeeting, and Webex tend to be the top 3. It's what most people tend to use. Also, if you've never used your software, you're going to want to make sure you're familiar generally with how it operates before you use it. This is just another thing to consider before your meeting, and it's generally good etiquette to sort of at least understand the program, so if your client has any issues, you can walk them through it. Another thing to consider is the hardware that you're using on your computer. The computer that I have at home, for example, is just fine for Zoom meetings, but when it comes to Webex, it ran into a few issues, being the work computer that I had. So, you want to make sure that your hardware is fully up to date and able to use all of the features available if you want to take advantage of them. The typical hardware limitation that you'll run into, by the way, with these sorts of meetings are issues with displaying filters. Filters are, useful, but not something that are really useful in a professional setting. So in a way, having a lower tier computer can sometimes be a benefit to you in that regard. The last thing you really will want to consider, though, with hardware is getting a good microphone. I don't think that the webcam that I'm using for this presentation has good audio, so I have this. It's just a simple high quality microphone, and it was rather inexpensive. Webcams you can get for maybe 20 bucks online, and you can find them on Amazon in a pretty high quality, but the attached microphone to them sometimes aren't the best. That's why I picked this up, and it was just $20 from a hardware store. These sorts of things will normally be advertised with sayings like high quality sound, and if you see one that says that, that's more than likely good enough. The last thing you'll want to consider, though, is where you're going to be. I mentioned it previously, but some programs have filters and background filters. These sort of change where you're presenting from. So for instance, with mine, you see the background of the room that I'm in. That's because I don't have a filter applied. It's something to consider. You don't want to give a presentation in a Starbucks where you've got a lot of audio noise and that sort of stuff as well. You want to make sure your background looks a little bit more professional too. So with that being said, now that we've covered the basics of things you should be thinking about, some online etiquette. We've already covered some of these, but it's useful to hammer some of the points home. The first being know your system. This referring back to Zoom or whatever online meeting you're using. You also want to make sure that you have proper lighting. You can see me right now very well, but if I had the lights off, you might not be able to see me as properly. So lighting is always a good thing. Most programs will also give you a way to sort of see yourself as you're talking. So this is a good way to check that and make sure you have all of the lighting you need. You also want to consider, once again, your location and the background. I used the example of a Starbucks before, but I was in an online meeting previously where someone was just talking on their phone as they were walking through a grocery store, which is not really the best impression if you're trying to talk to a client. So you might want to consider your location and background when you start a conversation. Also, you're going to want to ensure that your equipment is fully functional. Most programs have test features that are available through the menus, so you can check your audio quality as well as your video quality before you start your presentation. I do the same thing before I begin any of these webinars as well. Also, you're going to want to make sure you dress appropriately. I tend to wear ties for online meetings, or I will wear something like a button-up shirt. You also tend to get into trouble if you don't fully dress for the situation. I know a lot of news anchors in the news recently who have, made a few gaffes with regard to their physical presentation. They will have a button-up shirt on, but they, for instance, aren't wearing pants, or they're wearing some sort of, shorts. Those sorts of things are not very professional, and if you need to get up and move during the presentation, it'll be bad. So you always want to make sure you're fully and appropriately dressed before you begin an online meeting. And the last one is promptness. We wait a little bit after our start time for these webinars just to make sure that everyone has a chance to join us. However, that's not necessarily something that people do. When you're doing an online meeting, if you're hosting the meeting, you want to make sure that you actually join the meeting a little bit early. That's because if someone joins ahead of time, they just get a little waiting notice and sometimes hold music. You don't want to keep your attendees on hold for very long. So I recommend just starting your meeting up maybe 5 minutes beforehand. That doesn't mean you have to be ready to go for all of those 5 minutes, but you just start the meeting about 5 minutes early. Most people get a notice that you're, ready for the meeting, and they know then that when they join the meeting, you'll be there. It's a good peace of mind. Also, if you're just looking along and not listening, you won't get this, but a bonus point is to make sure you don't talk over people. In a face-to-face meeting, it's a little easier to hear other people and hear other side conversations, but in online meetings, that's not necessarily the case. If you're in a meeting with, say, 5 or 6 people, and you're trying to talk to just one of those people, it's not as easy as just, leaning over and going, hey, what did you do last night? You want to make sure that all of your conversations are on topic, at least verbally, throughout the presentation. Some messaging apps do have direct message options, which are the equivalent to whispering. And I'll get into how you open that when we walk through each of the systems. But they're basically like, one-on-one conversations within overall meetings. And that's the appropriate place to put those sorts of notes. You would do it over text. You wouldn't just whisper something, because even a whisper will talk over the main presenter. So the last bit of etiquette that I really want to cover is, should an online meeting be scheduled? This is something that I get into quite a bit. And, a lot of people, once they get started on Zoom or Webex or whatever they're using, tend to schedule a bunch of online meetings when they're not exactly necessary. And I get it. You get really excited about software and you want to make use of something that your company is paying for. But an online meeting isn't always necessarily the best thing to do. I like to walk through these bullet points that I have displayed on the screen before I actually start. First being, have I fully considered the topic at hand? And if you answer no to any of these questions, you should also consider doing something that is not an online meeting. For instance, the first point, have I considered everything about the subject at hand? If you haven't, you might want to think through more of what you need and decide if you need an online meeting, or if you even need to approach something else after you think about it a little more thoroughly. The second point is, do you need someone else's opinion or decision on this? If you don't need someone else's opinion, then you clearly don't need a meeting. You just need to do a little bit more work. Also, do you need a real-time conversation? That's something that, is it something that could be resolved maybe over email? Or maybe do I just need to directly message someone instead? Also, do you need to share files to get a point across? And this is where it gets a little iffy. All of the previous points are things that you've probably already thought about before you start a meeting, but this is really more of the decision breaker in my mind for, do I really need an online meeting, or do I just need to send an email? If you need to share more than one file, in my opinion, an online meeting is more than useful. If you don't need to share more than one file, then is it possible to maybe walk someone through it on the phone? Maybe like a 1 or 2 minute conversation. If you're just going to have a brief conversation and show them what they're doing or point out 1 or 2 parts of a document, maybe a phone call is more necessary, or maybe you just need a very descriptive email. And also the last question there is, can this be shared digitally? If it's something that's very private and personal and you can't share it digitally, or you don't want any risk of anything leaking out about it, maybe you need a face-to-face conversation, and that's just the last thing I bring up. There are encrypted channels on all of these services, and it's not likely that you'll get broken in on your conversation, but if someone's using a hacking tactic like man in the middle, sometimes they can still get your information. So it's just something to be aware of. If you're sharing things that are excessively sensitive, you might need a face-to-face meeting. So now that we've gotten through all of that, this is probably more of the thing you were looking for, which is which service we're going to use. I'm going to walk through 3 of these. I'm going to go through Zoom, Webex, and GoToMeeting. And each of these has some benefit and some downside. First being Zoom. It is a free service and it's used by most people. Almost everyone is familiar with Zoom, and most of the time, by default, they're not locked down by passwords. It is an encrypted connection, but direct links to whatever presentation you're using will work for literally anyone. So when you send out a meeting link, they could even share the link to their great aunt, and they would then also be able to join your conversation. It's something to be aware of for just link sharing in general too, because not only Zoom does this, but also Webex and GoToMeeting. Well, GoToMeeting a little bit less often, but we'll get into that in a moment. Then there's Webex. Webex can be free or it can be paid, pretty much like Zoom. That being said, though, meeting passwords become available at all levels of the service. If you're using Zoom, the free service is not locked down by passwords, but with Webex, you'll have that. Also, it is free to record meetings, and if your computer has good enough hardware, it also allows you to have virtual backgrounds available as well. That's something that I couldn't really display when I was recording this because of my own hardware limitations, but it's available. So if your area you're in is quiet, but you don't like to share like your home background, for example, you can turn one of those on. Also, lastly, we're going to be going through GoToMeeting. GoToMeeting is something that we use here at Cornerstone as well, and it's very nice, very secure. It is, however, paid only, not meaning that your client needs to pay for GoToMeeting to use it, but you have to pay for the service to do anything with it. That being said, it is encrypted at all plan levels fully at the same level that all the other services are, and they actually advertise as being HIPAA compliant. If you're going to be walking someone through private health information, that's the service that I'd recommend using. So let's get started on Zoom. First off, Zoom has a free basic service. It can host up to 100 people in that service, meaning you can have up to 100 people in your meeting. And the group meetings are good for about 40 minutes. They do have that lock there though. So if your presentation or your webinar or whatever you're doing is going to go longer than 40 minutes, you're going to want to use their next tier service, which is Pro. Pro is $149.90 per year per license, which can be broken down into a $12.50 a month per license or user, and there is a 9 license limit per Pro. To use a little bit simpler language, it means there are a maximum of 9 people who you can have on the Pro plan per month. It also allows hosting up to 100 participants, but it increases the participant level up to 1,000 with large meetings add-ons. Those are something else you can add to Zoom, and you do that when you set it all up and purchase your Pro plan. Group meetings can now go to 30 hours, so you can have meetings longer than a day if you feel like it, and it also allows social media streaming. So you can stream your meeting to, say, YouTube or whatever streaming service you'd like. I believe they're also integrated with a few other streaming services as well. They also allowed you to have up to 1 gigabyte of cloud recording per license at that next tier, and they also give you access to a meeting scheduler, and you can even link your Zoom account to Skype if you so choose. Skype is another service that we will not be covering today. It's sort of gone by the wayside and doesn't have as good video quality typically. So that being said, this is the Zoom screen. We use RingCentral here to use our Zoom meetings, and it's part of the benefit of using Zoom. Zoom is very well integrated into a lot of other web service providers. So for us, our RingCentral system is linked directly to Zoom. meaning this layout is exactly what you'll see if you launch Zoom from a desktop. Down in this right-hand corner, I'm going to be drawing all over this slide for a little bit, is where you get access to, let's go ahead and change the color of that actually. And we will erase the drawing and recircle. There we go. So that area that I just circled, really more this section here, is mainly what you're going to need to use in your meeting. The left-hand side is the mute function and start video function. This allows you to share your video from whatever webcam you're using, or also allows you to mute yourself or change your audio options. Each of these sections here, and I'm going to point it out a little bit more clearly, has these little up arrows by them as well. This is where you can choose the device that you're actually using to use your audio. A lot of times if you have a webcam, like I mentioned, it'll have a little microphone in it, but that doesn't actually mean that that microphone is always the best quality. That's why I got a headset. Typically, if you're using a webcam to share your video, you're going to want to click on that little drop-down arrow there and select your microphone to use audio. That's just something that I personally have to do pretty much every time I use Zoom. You can actually set it to default to your microphone though, through the same settings. You just right-click on the option and choose default. The next section over here that I'd like to point out is invite. If you're scheduling this meeting beforehand, you won't have to do this. But if you're in your meeting and you think you really need to bring someone else in order to have a conversation, you can do that by clicking invite. You'll get two different options, which I couldn't get a very good picture of, so I don't have it displayed. The first is to send an email, and it links automatically to your Outlook account. If you click the share via email option, it'll open up an email window, and you can just type in the email address of whoever you're talking to. The other option, which I normally do, is to share a URL. That's just a little link to your chat. You can click share URL, and it will copy the URL to whatever you're using. Then you send your message however you want to whoever you're sending it to, and hit Control-V to paste, or right-click and then hit paste. And it will put a direct link to your webinar or to your meeting or whatever you're doing to whoever you're sending it to. You can also manage participants in a meeting, and this is actually pretty important. Let's say you have a meeting with 5 or 6 different participants, and one of them just will not stop talking, or they've got a lot of background noise and they're not muting themselves, and because they're being so disruptive, you can't really have a meeting. You can actually kick someone out of a meeting by clicking on this Manage Participants tab, clicking on their name, and hitting remove from meeting or kick. Those are typically the 2 terms that are used. So you would click on that, click on the person, and then click remove. And share is the next option in the line, but we'll cover that on the next slide. This is how you would share your screen and also share different documents that you want to present throughout your presentation. They also provide a chat option right down here. This is that text messaging that I was mentioning before. If you want to send a message to notify someone directly of, let's say, something coming up in the meeting, you could use this chat option right here to bring up a chat window and just message them directly. And then lastly, down at the bottom in Zoom, you have the option to record a meeting. If you click that, it will tell you, do you want to start recording? You hit yes, it notifies everyone in the chat that you're being recorded, or the meeting, sorry, that you're being recorded, and that way everyone knows. So with that said, let's cover screen sharing in a bit more detail. Screen sharing looks a little bit like this, and this is the menu that pops up after you click share. Once you click share, it'll also give you that little pop-up option right next to the share screen to let you choose to end your screen share or whatever you're doing. This menu that I have up is exactly the menu that you'll see whenever you have something running on your computer. I'm going to use my pen here and circle the different options and explain it a little bit. I'm not covering the advanced options here because you typically will not need them. And if you're a beginner to Zoom, just start with basics. You're not going to want to get into more of the detailed information. What I recommend doing is always just sharing screen one. You do this to share literally everything that is available on your first screen. They are numbered here as well, but because Zoom also gives you a little video of what's on each of the screens, it lets you see more of what exactly you're sharing. They also give you an option to share a whiteboard. This is just a blank board that you can draw all over. So if you're trying to write something out, then that might be useful as well. Although you can draw over any screen share as well using the Zoom tools. So it's not necessary. Well, actually, I take that back. For Zoom, it is necessary. If you want to draw all over something, you're going to need to use the whiteboard. For most of these other systems that I'm covering, though, that's not correct. They also have the option to share a phone or iPad screen if you're joining in from mobile, or you can share individual programs, which is what will also be displayed under that. I have the snipping tool open in this example, as well as the direct link to my screen down here. That is these two options. If you're going to be sharing multiple files, I personally prefer to just share one screen, but if you're just sharing something like an Excel program through one of these bottom windows, then whenever you leave that screen, whenever you go away from whatever program you're sharing, it will pause the presentation for everyone else. Not to say that it's pausing your audio or your video, but what it is actually pausing is whatever that program is doing to the viewer. So if you navigate away and you're trying to share something in Excel and trying to bring up another share, you're going to have to get back into the share window and then change the program you're using versus just dragging and dropping something between your screens. And if you have a question about any of that, please let me know. I'm happy to do a direct presentation to you and give more of a concrete example. We might actually do a video follow-up to this as well. But that's generally how you would use the Zoom interface. The next option is actually my favorite option, but like I said, it's not, advertised as HIPAA certified, but it should be fine, is Webex. This is a free and paid system as well. I like it because it gives you a lot on the free version, actually, compared to basically any other web service that I've seen. It's free for just you, but whoever talking to whatever just has to have the Webex software installed. They don't need to make an account or anything. They have meeting lengths up to 50 minutes, which are generally about as long as you want face-to-face meetings to go for anyway. They also have up to 100 participants unlocked as well, but you only have access to online support at the free version. It also gives you the access to save recordings of your meetings locally. So that means if you record a meeting, it will save to your computer or device. Also, it allows dial-in costs for clients on services. So it doesn't give you access to toll-free numbers for calls, but it will let your clients dial in. Also, however, is the starter option, which is a little more expensive than Zoom. I believe it's about $1 more a month per contract holder, but you can have up to 50 contracts at this starter option versus Zoom's 9. It allows you to have a meeting length of up to 24 hours, gives you up to 150 participants, lets you actually call in to Webex's online support versus just using their chatbots for troubleshooting. And it also gives you access to cloud storage. It gives you access to 5 gigabytes versus the 1 gigabyte that Zoom gives you. It also allows you to start recording in different file formats. And this is useful if you're trying to share a bunch of different videos, or maybe you're uploading to a weird website that won't let you actually upload any sort of WAV file. That gets a bit technical, but basically MP4 is pretty well supported across all things, so that's very useful. It also gives you access to your call transcriptions, meaning that it will actually, take your voice and turn it into text. In my opinion, it's not as useful as an actual like stenographer, of course. Stenographers get a lot more right, but it can be pretty useful. They actually get it pretty accurate, but just be aware there will be some words that'll probably be a little mistranslated. It also gives you the ability to add alternate hosts, which is something we didn't really cover for Zoom. But what this means is when a host of a webinar, whoever initiated it, leaves the webinar, typically that will end it for pretty much everyone. If I left this webinar now, typically that means that you wouldn't be able to see what's going on anymore, the meeting would end. With the ability to add alternate hosts, that means you can just choose someone else to also host the webinar. And if you have to leave or you step out for some reason, it'll keep going. I say webinar a lot, but I really mean online meeting. My apologies. It also gives you the ability to transfer files through the webinar. So instead of just bringing it up on your screen and saying like, hey, I have this, document, I'm going to walk you through it. It also lets you actually put those documents in the meeting themselves. So everyone gets access to it in that meeting and you don't have to send a follow-up email, which I think is pretty useful. It also will encrypt all meeting recordings. So with Zoom, the meetings that are actually going back and forth, those channels are encrypted. But if you're recording the meeting itself, that recording typically isn't. And what you're downloading from the website might travel over a secure channel, but the recording itself isn't encrypted. So if someone intercepts it, then they'll be able to see the meeting. With encrypted meeting recordings, the data itself of the video is already encrypted, and you won't need to do much more. I actually got a few different shots of Webex just because I think it's necessary. Webex is probably the most advanced functional program that we're going to cover today, so I tried to go into a bit more detail. This screen that you're looking at right now is actually a preview screen, and it's something that Webex will give you no matter what before you join in. This is a picture of my wall, but if you had the webcam facing at you, you'd be able to see pretty much everything in the background. You can also use that little magic wand up there in the corner. I'm going to go ahead and circle it right up here to change the background of your presentation, and that won't go over you. This is sort of what I was mentioning earlier when I was saying some online meeting options give you the ability to change your background. That would mean that instead of seeing a beautiful wall, you would actually see like Aruba or a beach or whatever background you chose. They also have standard office environments as well, so you could choose that if that's what you prefer to present with. Also, it lets you check your audio. This is where you would choose to use, a microphone that's physically plugged into your computer, or you could choose to dial in from a phone line. I personally think that online connections tend to be better if you have a high quality microphone. You get a little less static, but it's really personal preference. And if you don't have a microphone, then you can always use your phone. It will also give you the option to test your speakers and microphone or whatever audio equipment you have, or what I think is really cool, the ability to connect to a video system. What this means is if you have like a Wi-Fi enabled, projector, you can use your Wi-Fi to connect to that system. That's what that little button down there does. It's a little complicated, and I don't recommend setting it up if you're not, familiar with the technology, but it's an ability that you have. It will also give you the ability to check your microphone options down below. Erase the drawings and rewrite it for a bit more clarity here. But you get access to your microphone options down here, along with your video options, and then the ability to start the meeting as well. When you start your meeting, it'll look a little something like this. And there's a lot of menu features up here and different screens and things that you can get access to. We're going to start at the bottom right or bottom left and move over, up, and to the left. So that way we walk through pretty much everything. Down here in the corner, if I go ahead and start highlighting, you still have access to the same sort of microphone and video options that Zoom had. it's kind of laid out in the same way as well. So it's pretty, intuitive. If you're starting to just use, Webex, I'd recommend just interacting with these options. You also gain access to the same screen share options down here that I showed you with Zoom, and recordings as well. Same procedure as Zoom. You click record, everyone in the meeting gets notified. It's pretty simple. Outside of that, you also gain access to these options down here, which you don't actually have with Zoom. The little face plus icon, I can get to here in a minute, but it basically gives you the ability to add and share reactions. And the drop down button down here we'll also get into on the next slide. It also gives you the option right down here to end the meeting. You can also see all of the participants right in here. And if you're hosting the meeting, it gives you the ability to mute everyone or unmute everyone through these options below. You also gain access to some more advanced options in here. If you click on the triple dot section, you gain access to a lot more detailed information on each of the participants, but you really won't need that if you're just setting up a meeting. Each of the participants in the meeting will have a little taskbar like this. Mine says host because I was hosting this example meeting, but it gives you the ability to very much see who's all in the meeting, all right there. If we go ahead and advance the slide, you'll also see some of the cooler functions of Webex as well, mainly being dark mode. You can change all of the sort of colors and patterns of what your individual meeting screen looks like through some of these files up here. I'm gonna go ahead and hit the pen here. You do that with the file option up here, as well as I believe through some of the help menus as well. Help is really useful. It allows you to get into more detailed troubleshooting. And if you have a concern or question about what's going on in your meeting, you can click the help section and there will be people there to help you. Another thing that I did actually on this screen is I opened up the chat. You can do that by clicking on this little chat bubble down here, and you can access that through these additional options as well if you don't see it on your screen. The chat looks a little something like this, and it's very similar to what the other chats that I mentioned look like. You have a little drop down here to choose who you're texting or sending the message to. This says everyone, but if you click on the drop down right over here, you'll gain access to see pretty much everyone in the meeting, and you'll be able to send them direct messages. Then you enter your chat. Right below that, you're in this section. Additionally, you have the ability to create breakout sessions. Breakout sessions are basically webinars within webinars. If you realize that two people need to talk a little more one-on-one and rejoin the meeting as a whole later, you can set these up. You just click on breakout sessions and then create them. You can also then choose to send people into them by clicking on them over here, or right-clicking on them and hitting send to breakout session, and they will get forwarded there. I believe you can have starting up to 4 or 5 breakout sessions, but this is useful if you're having like an all-employee meeting at a larger company and you're trying to have separate sections to sort of go over everything. You also gain access to more advanced options through most of these above, but some of them are pretty much duplicates of what you show below. For instance, the audio and video option, which is right up here, is pretty much a duplicate of the mute and stop video option. You gain access to a few more functions, but nothing really to get into detail on. View right here is also where you can change the overall look of the meeting and also what you're viewing within the webinar. If someone starts sharing something, you can change your view to go away from it. You also gain access to the share icon right here, which is just a duplicate of this share button. It's just a little less user-friendly, so they added it down here as well. You can share content. There's also a shortcut, Control-Shift-D, that is right there as well. And you can also share multimedia as well as share your meeting window with others. This would mean that if you share your meeting window, everyone else gets to see exactly what you see within your meeting, being the participant screen, all of the options there. It's really useful if you're trying to explain to someone what to click on their screen in order to access something. Lastly, you can get into general advanced settings with File here. I don't recommend clicking on that if you haven't really used it. But that's generally Webex in a nutshell. You do have to actually have this installed on the client end as well to use it. You don't have to make an account, but both people have to have the software, and that's the same thing with Zoom. But that's sort of the advantage to our next and last option that we're going through, which is GoToMeeting. GoToMeeting is really useful if you're trying to share a bunch of content with a bunch of different people who don't necessarily need to have software installed on their end. It only is paid, and the professional version is $14 a month or $168 annually. Or if you want to go the annual option, it's only $108, which translates to $9 a month. It is limited to 150 people, however, who have the professional license. Well, I'm sorry, I misspoke there. It's 150 participants in your meetings. You get to have your professional license, but only 150 people can attend the meeting at once. Also, if you choose, you can get access to the business class option, which is $14.25 per month if you're paying month to month, or it is $144 in a one-time annual payment, which translates to about $12 a month. This limit on participants is also raised to 250 people. Useful, but most people won't find it necessary in this case. You gain access to recordings as well at this business class level of all of your meetings if you choose to record, as well as meeting transcription and slide to PDF, which translates your presentation slides, sort of like what I'm going through here, into an actual full PDF and lets you advance them through their GoToMeeting app. So that way you don't have to start up a screen share and share a separate program. You can just walk through all of the slides that you're trying to present in the meeting itself by clicking on arrows. It also gives you access to a smart assistant, which is kind of useful. I've never actually seen a good use for it personally, but it basically recognizes things within PDFs that you might want to interact with and labels them. It also lets you incorporate links or other things into your meeting, so participants can also join things and kind of venture off on their own little rabbit holes during your meeting. That's why I don't personally like it, because I think if you're starting a meeting like this, you'll want to share it with everyone. It also allows you to take notes through your app, as well as gain access to drawing tools, which are the things that I'm using now. And it also allows you to turn control of the meeting over to others. Like we said before, if you're controlling it and you leave, typically that ends the meeting for everyone. So by turning control over to other people, you gain access to letting them, have full control over the meeting, and you can then leave. It also is useful because you can turn over full control to other people and let them not only share their screen, but sort of take over what they're trying to share. So this is sort of the user interface for a GoToMeeting conversation. And like the others, it's pretty much exactly the same. You have access to your camera and mic control on the left. You also have access to sharing your screen right here. And you have access to leave the presentation right here. If you click on leave, it will open up a little window that says, like, are you sure? Give you a little example of what's going on, and then say, okay, I want to leave, or okay, let's stay in the meeting, and then give control to someone else. You also have access to your settings menu right up here. This little gear will give you some advanced options on what you're sharing, as well as give you options for like ending the meeting, changing different viewing options, etc. It's not something that's excessively useful, and you likely won't ever have a need to get into this gear setting. But it's basically also where you will edit any mic function if you're physically plugged in, or camera option. You also have the option to bring up text chat Same with Webex and with Zoom by clicking on that little bubble right there. And you can also view who's in the meeting by clicking on that little people icon there. That's also how you gain access to seeing each individual profile and kicking people from the meeting. Same as Webex. You also have some different view options up above. That's where you, as a viewer of the presentation, can change what you're seeing. You can choose view who's talking, or you can choose something like view the shared document. If you see view who's talking, it'll lay out each of the participants in a window sort of like this. Everyone has their own little view icon over here, or sort of filling the space. If you switch that to document view then, or screen share, it'll show you whatever's being shared on the screen. You also have the option to do an instant meeting from this menu, record your meetings, or lock your meeting down. That means that no one will be able to join your meeting or leave the meeting as well through this lock option. And you can also change the type of the go-to presentation you're doing by clicking on this drop-down. Most people won't really want to do that, but it basically means that you can change from a meeting to a webinar or access all of the other go-to services you have. GoToMeeting is part of a larger company just called GoTo, and GoTo has a lot of different web chat products available. So if you want to make sure that GoToMeeting is what you exactly want, you can, browse through their different options online, but GoToMeeting is pretty much what you'll want for one-on-one client meetings. And also GoToMeeting is probably the easiest to interact with, so that's all you really see as far as your user interface. The one thing I did want to go into a little bit in more detail though was settings. Settings is that little gear icon that I mentioned earlier. And if you click on it, you'll get access to your webcam options, like I mentioned. You also gain access to your advanced audio options as well. One other thing that I wanted to go through, because sometimes it's not very clear, is what your view under the people section really looks like. It's pretty straightforward and interactive, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone at least got to see sort of what these menus look like. If I click on my pen option here, you gain access to, just like Webex, mute and unmute all. You can also individually mute people by clicking on this option right here. You can also individually turn off people's webcams or screens by clicking on the screen. And if you click on this drop-down, you'll gain access to some more advanced options as well for controlling them, things like kicking them from the meeting, that sort of thing. In order to share your meeting link with someone else, just sort of on the fly, you would click this copy meeting link section here and just send it the same way I've explained before. Or you can invite people directly over email by clicking on the invite if they're part of your organization. You can also lock down the meeting by clicking on that little lock button there. And all of that is under this people menu. So after going through all that, I just want to reiterate, these are 3 options that are generally used by most people. There's Zoom, which benefits of being, cheap and easy to use, but it gives you the least number of options and advanced features, as well as being the least secure. You've got Webex, which in my opinion is the most advanced option. It gives you access to a lot of different tools, and it's also the middle cost. But the downsides being you also have to have the program installed if you're just joining a meeting. And lastly, there's GoToMeeting. GoToMeeting is a longer running service. It's very professional, but it's not free, and there's no way to make it free for people who are trying to organize meetings. All of your attendees in all of these services can just join in for free, but GoToMeeting is also the most expensive option, and typically people would rather go for either Webex or Zoom. I also really do like GoToMeeting. It's a great service, but it is the most expensive. They have fewer user issues just because they've been running a little bit longer than most other services, and typically they're very professional. That being said, this was sort of a, well, not so brief, but brief coverage of how to interact with all 3 different meeting services. this has been our GoToMeeting and webinar presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them now, and I will go ahead and look through them. We do actually already have one comment, which is with respect to HIPAA. Please confirm GoToWebinar in respect to HIPAA. Yes, absolutely. GoToWebinar is absolutely HIPAA compliant. It's the exact same sort of service that you'll be getting with GoToMeeting, and that one just advertises straight up as being HIPAA compliant. The reason it's HIPAA compliant is because your client doesn't have to have another service in order to do anything, and it doesn't do any pass-throughs. It's a little complicated, but either way, they advertise as being HIPAA compliant. Not to say the other options aren't HIPAA compliant. They do have full encryption and everything. I'm just not personally 100% sure of the exact specifications. I believe they would be fine, but it's sort of up in the air. Is this being recorded? Yes, absolutely, this is being recorded. All of our webinars are recorded, and actually I will go ahead and show you right now where they're recorded. I'm just going to exit out of that slideshow real quick and go to our website. All of our recordings are right here. So this is where you would go to see them. You would go to our website, www.crnstone.com. And then you can go to Resource Center Webinar Series. And you'll gain access to all of our individual recording libraries. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and put this in our chat as well. There we go. I have a link directly to our resource center there. If you want to, you can just copy it and put it in a Word document, or you can click on the link, go to the website, and click on this little star option right up here. That will add the website to your favorites. So if you ever need to access it, you can go to your favorites library in whatever browser you're using. In Firefox, which is what I use, it'll be right up here. And then you'll be able to just go directly there. You can click on each of our individual access recording sections for each of our webinars as well, and that'll take you to the full library. We also actually have a lot of different recordings on here. If I click on Access Recordings for Tech Tuesday, you gain access to all of our recordings from last year as well. So if you missed a meeting from last year and you want to just brush up, feel free to click through these options as well. It's a good question. Okay, we do have one more, which is someone who's newer to using, Ring Central and Zoom and just got cameras. Can I address how to use it during the meeting? Absolutely. All you would really want to do, if I go ahead and let me try and present this slide one more time. Here we go. First, you want to make sure that your webcam is physically plugged into the computer. That can be through a front USB port or a back USB port. Most webcams just use a little USB plug, and I don't have a good option to show, because if I unplug my webcam, you'll stop seeing my well, and then I wouldn't be able to actually share the webinar plug anyway. But basically you plug it into the front, and then you would go into your Zoom menu, and I'm just going to use Zoom, but it's the same sort of thing if you're going through, Webex or basically any web service. So we're going to start our slideshow from this slide. Here we are. What you would do is you would click on this option right here, Start Video. If you click on Start Video, it will start showing the video feed from the webcam of whatever computer you're using. And the reason I say that is to be very specific. If you're using a camera and you're also using a remote access to your PC, I'm trying to think of a better way to say that. So let's say you're working at a work from home computer, and your computer that's at your physical desk is not the computer that has all the programs that you're running on it. Let's say you've done a remote connection to your work computer. and you're in a meeting through your work computer. If you hit that start video option, it will use the webcam connected to your work computer at work. It will not use your home computer's connection. You have to make sure that you have whatever meeting service you're using installed on the physical device that you're using it from. To give it a bit of a simpler solution, let's say you're using Excel at your work computer, but if you move out of your remote connection, you're on a different desktop. That's sort of how you know you're using two different computers. In order to use your video on whatever computer you're running the program on, you have to make sure that you have the actual program itself installed on the computer that you're using. So that, I'm sorry if that was a little rambly and a little complicated, but please feel free to email me directly, or actually I'll reach out to you directly as well, and we can cover that in more detail. Okay, we do have one other question here, which is for one-on-one meetings in GoToMeeting. Is that professional enough versus the business option? Yes, absolutely. That's more than fine, and it'd probably be all that you need. The business option is really more for people who want to take full advantage of things like recording their webinars or recording whatever they're presenting, as well as maybe gain access to a few more additional tools. GoToMeeting is really great, I think, and I personally prefer the business option, but the professional is probably more than enough. That's all you'd really need if you're just sharing things one-on-one. All right, we have another great question here, which is, does each participant need to pay for GoToMeeting? No, they do not. Only the person who's hosting and running the meeting has to pay. So that would mean, like in my case, I'm hosting this webinar on another GoTo product, GoToWebinar. Cornerstone has to pay for a GoToWebinar, but each of you don't have to pay for access to GoToWebinar to see all of these. It's the same sort of thing with GoToMeeting. Each of the people just have to click on your link and they'll be able to access it. The only person who has to pay is the one who's actually running it. All right, and I know that was kind of rapid fire. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to post them. I'm happy to answer them at this time. Otherwise, please feel free to email me as well. I'm gonna scroll through the end real quick here, but my contact information will be up on the screen here in a moment. If I can change my interactions quick enough. Sorry about that. There we go. My direct contact information is right here. It's tlevine@crnstone.com, and my phone number is right there as well, 513-487-5390. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to contact me directly, and I'll be happy to answer them as well. So I'll be on the line for maybe 1 or 2 more minutes if you have any additional questions you'd like to ask, but those were really great questions, and thank you for attending.